What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Run Pure Sports First Look NBA podcast. Of course, I'm DraftCheat, and today flying solo due to some technical difficulties. So talking today's Monday 7-game NBA slate from a DFS perspective, covering both FanDuel, DraftKings salaries, getting you ready for the day. Of course, don't have all the information we need in the morning on a Monday, but we will have it up on the site, runpuresports.com. You can sign up, all sports, betting, DFS, everything you need, the Discord, for one monthly low price. Check us out at runpuresports.com. With that, let's jump into these games. First one we'll talk about, as always, going by the DraftKings order of games, is Dallas and Orlando. Dallas favored by 6 in this one, going on the road to Orlando. Pretty healthy 221 total. In terms of news and notes and injuries and all that good stuff in this one, not a ton. We do expect Kristaps Porzingis to play. And then other than that, pretty healthy rotations for the most part. Of course, guys like Luka Doncic always going to be kind of the primary talking point anytime he's on a slate. He's been a little bit slow recently, coming off a 50 fantasy point performance against Brooklyn. Of course, nothing wrong with that in a vacuum, but at 10.7K on DraftKings and a high price point on FanDuel as well, it's not exactly what you're looking for. Matchup here is just okay, I would say, for a guy like Luka against a fairly good defensive team in Orlando, a team that plays relatively slowly. So I myself don't anticipate playing Luka tonight, but of course he's always capable of a big game. And frankly, this game in general doesn't look like the most appealing one from a DFS perspective. I'm really not seeing a ton here that I anticipate going to myself. Of course, Nick Vucevic, if you really want to play kind of a contrarian type center who has upside, I think he's a reasonable option, 10.2K on DraftKings. I mean, the usage for this guy has been insane. Last 4 games, attempts from the field, 26, 23, 22, 27. Nothing has really changed to reduce those field goal attempts. So, listen, he's certainly capable of it. Dallas doesn't really have the defenders to slow him down. I don't know, a little bit talking myself into Vucevic here. I think, with guys like Jokic and Embiid, if he plays on the slate, I think he'll get Jokic at lower ownership. So I don't mind that. But, other than kind of the stars here, I actually would prefer Vucevic over Doncic myself. I bet Vuce would be lower owned too. But other than those guys, I don't anticipate going to the value much in Dallas and Orlando unless we end up getting unexpected news. But for now, kind of a game that I'll mostly be shying away from. The other 7 Eastern time game is Indiana and Philadelphia. This one has the potential, at least, to be very interesting from a DFS perspective. 223 total in this one, which, again, isn't anything to write home about. 76ers favored by 4.5. We could see that number change throughout the day, depending on who's ruled in and out of this one, because some important pieces currently listed as questionable: Tobias Harris and Joel Embiid from the 76ers side, and then Malcolm Brogdon and Jeremy Lamb from the Indiana side. We did see Brogdon miss the Pacers' last game, in which they lost to the Knicks. TJ McConnell filled in as the starting point guard and played 46 minutes. Had a big game. I don't know if you can expect him to play that many, but clearly if Brogdon is out again, they're going to rely on McConnell to kind of run that offense. And even at 6.1K, seems like a lot to pay for a guy like TJ McConnell, but I think you can do it. So he would be an interesting play only if Brogdon sits, to me. And then, on the Philadelphia side, Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid, 2 heavy usage players. We saw Tobias Harris missed last game, and somewhat expectedly, Joel Embiid went absolutely off in that one. So if Tobias sits again and Embiid plays, despite a relatively tough matchup against Indiana, I think you'd have to consider Joel Embiid for sure as one of the top plays, one of the top spends on this slate. And then if Embiid sits and Tobias plays, I think Harris himself would be a strong option. I think you'd see a lot of people perhaps go to a guy like Ben Simmons. Interestingly, when Embiid is out or off the court, Simmons' production doesn't really go up. It's kind of just a weird thing, just kind of how that offense operates. But Harris's does. So I would look at Tobias Harris there. And then if both miss, a lot of guys become in play for Philadelphia. At that point, Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, played big minutes last time out. We saw off the bench, Shake Milton played 32 minutes. He would be in play. Dwight Howard, if he got the start, I think he probably would be a pretty strong play in this one. Almost the whole Philadelphia team that's going to get minutes. Danny Green, just a ton of guys you could have interest in on the Philadelphia side if both Harris and Embiid do miss. So that's, the first game of the night or one of the first two games of the night. So we'll have that information prior to lock, and certainly something to monitor throughout the day. Let's go to Denver and Chicago. Of course, Denver going to be favored in this one. Just 4.5-point favorites. A little surprising, I suppose. Denver not quite as good on the road. And frankly, they've been a little bit disappointing as a team this year. Certainly that wouldn't apply to Nikola Jokic's or Jamal Murray's individual play. But, beyond those two, kind of disappointing performances from a fair amount of these guys. They've, of course, had some injuries. That's going to be the case once again. Paul Millsap, JaMychal Green, Gary Harris all out for Denver. Chicago looks like they're going to be fully healthy for this one, or relatively so anyway, compared to what they've been recently. They did have their last game canceled against the Toronto Raptors, but that was due to the Raptors' health and safety protocol situation. So looks like Chicago should be good to go here. I kind of anticipate Denver controlling this one. Of course, it all starts with Jokic. I think he is pretty excellent play. I would lean, I think, Embiid over Jokic if Tobias Harris sits, but if Tobias Harris plays, I think I would go to Jokic over Embiid. Certainly just a tremendous matchup for Jokic here. I do prefer to play Jokic in general on when he's at home, but certainly can use him on the road too. Just historically, and this year too, he's been a fair bit better. One of the biggest home road differences in the league. Not too surprising when you consider where he's playing at altitude in Denver. Jamal Murray, it's a great matchup for him. I love targeting guards against Chicago, who is very poor at defending the pick and roll. Jamal Murray uses a fair bit of that, although not as much as most point guards, because obviously a ton of the offense does run through Nikola Jokic. But 8,900, steep price point to pay. Certainly you can, and I would anticipate pretty low ownership, which I guess is somewhat enticing. But in terms of like a point per dollar projection, I don't think JaMychal Murray is going to be coming up anywhere near the top of the list at day's end. So perhaps a contrarian option, but I don't think much more than that. We have seen better play from Michael Porter Jr. recently, 35, 37 fantasy points in the last two. Probably going to have to play big minutes here. Only played 28 last time out, but that was due to a 30-point win for the Nuggets over the Thunder. But he's had to shoot the ball really well to kind of get there. 5 of 8 from 3, 3 of 7 from 3, 60, 70% from the field overall. So I'm not really sure. He's still not a super high usage player. Gets almost no assists. And then so it's really just kind of points and rebounds that you're looking at. Hard to kind of get there at 7K when you're only contributing in the two categories. So Porter Jr., 7K. With all the guys out for Denver, I think you could play him, but for me, not the most exciting option. And then the Bulls, the conversation with them usually starts with that Zach LaVine. I don't really have a problem with him at 9,500, but given basically a fully healthy team, not the best matchup in the world. Denver doesn't play at a super fast pace or anything like that. I think I'll probably end up passing on the Bulls on this 7-game slate. Let's go to Utah and New Orleans. I believe the highest total on the slate in this one, certainly way up there, 236 expected between these two teams. Probably a game you're going to want to target a little bit, although, people traditionally don't love targeting the Jazz games, but they're playing at a much faster pace this season. The Jazz should be healthy in this one. They were out without Mike Conley in the last game. We saw big games, somewhat predictably, in my opinion, from Joe Ingles. Donovan Mitchell has been very good, but I'm not paying this elevated price tag for him. I do like Rudy Gobert quite a bit in this one, just because I think he's going to be out there for a lot of minutes. Price tag 7,400 on DraftKings, not too bad. I think you're probably going to get 40 fantasy points almost as a floor from Gobert. Maybe not the most ceiling in the world, but you get 50 fantasy points for 7,400. You're obviously going to be satisfied with that one. The Pelicans are a little bit tougher. I mean, there's just a lot of mouths to feed there. So Redick might miss, but I mean, Lonzo Ball and Zion and Brandon Ingram, Steven Adams usually plays pretty big minutes at center. Bledsoe can be somewhat high usage. It's just tough to kind of, pinpoint where exactly the production is going to come from New Orleans. I've been, keeping my eye on Lonzo Ball, who's playing a lot of minutes recently. We're seeing him play like 35 to 40 minutes pretty much every game out. So he's interesting. He's been aggressive with his shot. The last 2 games, 12 and 10 shots. And, Conley and Mitchell are fine defenders, but you can certainly attack Utah at least a little bit from the perimeter. So I could see Lonzo Ball kind of firing away in this one. 6,800 is a lot on DraftKings. You can play him 6,500 on FanDuel, not too bad. So he's a guy that I'm looking at. I don't think I would go with Zion in this one, although I believe, if my memory serves me right, he's played pretty well against the Jazz. I guess 40 fantasy points per game, kind of right around his season average. So about what you would expect, I suppose. For a 236 total, I wish there was more here that I liked, and maybe we'll get news throughout the day that will kind of make some of these plays more enticing if, an unexpected player has to sit out. But as of now, Gobert, my favorite play in this one. Steven Adams, I think you're going to see him out there for big minutes, and he's, pretty much a fantasy point per minute type player. So 5,400 for him. If you wanted to get a little bit contrarian at the center spot, wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. Let's go to Brooklyn and San Antonio. This should be another pretty interesting game from a DFS perspective. San Antonio obviously missed, I think it was close to 10 days with the health and safety protocols. And I think they might have missed a game or two because of that nasty Texas weather as well. Anyway, in this one, Brooklyn favored by 5, 233.5 total. James Harden, who got to play without both Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving last game, actually kind of disappointed. The Nets got blown out. They just, besides the big three, they don't have a ton of talent on that team. I mean, Joe Harris is a good player, but it's kind of the big three. We will see Kyrie Irving return in this one, so that'll take obviously some of the pressure off of James Harden. Also makes him a little bit less appealing, but he's crushed playing most of these games without Kevin Durant, who is, of course, going to miss another one. So I don't mind going back to James Harden coming off that disappointing game as super chalk. Should rebound quite nicely here. I don't think San Antonio really has the personnel to slow him down. From the Spurs side, they still do have some players out. Rudy Gay, Devin Vassell, and Derek White all ruled out already for this one. Keldon Johnson is questionable. We did see DeMar DeRozan have a very strong game in his return. He missed, obviously, all the games that the team missed in general, and missed one more due to the death of his father, but came back, had a brilliant game against New Orleans, across 38 minutes, put up 54 DraftKings points. Given kind of the state of the Spurs right now, they need him out there for big minutes, and obviously the matchups is really good against the Brooklyn Nets. So DeMar DeRozan, 8,400 looks like a high price tag. I'm certainly willing to pay that if I land there. I think he's got easy 50 fantasy point upside in this one. DeJounte Murray been playing very well. He's put up 45, 50, 55 fantasy points the last 3 games that he's played in. Minutes have been ticking upward, as has the usage. Obviously a terrific rebounder for a guard. He's just been playing, frankly, outstanding basketball. So you look at his price tag, 8,100 on DraftKings. It's a high price to pay, 8,400 on FanDuel, but he's been good. And if you're kind of stacking this game up, I think DeJounte Murray, along with DeRozan, would be the key pieces that I'd look at. And then, of course, Harden and or Kyrie Irving on the Brooklyn side. Problem is all those guys, very expensive, hard to create, a kind of appealing game stack when everybody's priced to the roof. But I do expect a high-scoring game here, perhaps a close game, and, big games from all the stars. So if there's enough value and you wanted to kind of go heavy on this game, I could see it working out in the end for sure. A couple more games to get to as we move right along here on the DraftCheat solo cast. Cleveland and Houston. Houston, it seems like, I don't have the numbers here, but it seems like they're getting blown out pretty much more than any other team They are favored by 2.5 over the Cavaliers, who obviously aren't playing super well either. A low 216 total in this one, but I don't think that necessarily means we can just write it off completely from a DFS perspective. I believe the plan was for John Wall to sit this one out on the back-to-back. Houston played on Sunday, but because he played so few minutes and played poorly and the Houston Rockets got blown out, it sounds like he could end up playing in this one. It's not clear. Victor Oladipo will be in there. He did not play. I don't believe he played yesterday. I think I have that right. He's interesting to me. So he didn't play yesterday. So he turned down a 2-year, like $45 million contract extension. So he'll have something to prove, I think, in this one. 7,700 for Oladipo. I can't do it if John Wall is in there. Obviously, they're going to be splitting kind of the touches and the playmaking responsibility in the backcourt if Wall plays. But if Wall is out, I'm definitely willing to go to Oladipo here. I could see a big game out of him. I like the matchup for him, certainly against Sexton and Garland. So Oladipo will be someone that I'll be monitoring kind of the news in this one. This game does start 2 hours after lock, so we might not have the information on John Wall, but I'd like to, if I can, leave a spot open to perhaps play Oladipo and then pivot off of him maybe if Wall ends up playing. The Cleveland guards, Sexton and Garland, they've been playing, at least from a fantasy perspective, some pretty good basketball, but they're priced up. 7,500 for Sexton, 6,900 for Garland. I do like this matchup for them quite a bit. But those are high price tags to pay. I would certainly prefer Oladipo over both of them if John Wall is out. I don't see a ton on the wings here for either team that I like. You have to go all the way to center, I think, before we're kind of talking about other options. Jarrett Allen, I think, is very interesting. So 8,500. It's kind of almost a sticker shock price tag for Jarrett Allen, but this dude's earned it. So he is coming off a little bit of a down game against Philadelphia, but that's against Joel Embiid, right? No real surprises there. He went off for 61 fantasy points against Houston just 2 games ago. Had been on an absolute roll prior to that Philadelphia game, and no surprise. I mean, Houston just doesn't have anybody to deal with him. DeMarcus Cousins off the team, Christian Wood still injured. They're playing, PJ Tucker minutes at the center, Justin Patton, who hasn't been able to stick on a team in the league these last 3 years. It's just kind of a feast situation for Jarrett Allen. He pulled down 18 rebounds across 37 minutes in that game against Houston about a week ago now. So, yeah, 8,500 high price tag, but I think you can expect 50-plus fantasy points out of him. I'm interested to see where his ownership falls. I could see it being, frankly, pretty low due to, 1, the high price tag, and 2, the low total in this game. So, yeah, maybe, if Wall is out, perhaps you're looking at a Jarrett Allen and Victor Oladipo, little mini stack there, kind of the 2 premier players on each of their teams. I would assume if this game stays close, both those guys going to get close to 40 minutes. So certainly something to keep an eye on with Cleveland and Houston, and especially if the ownership projections come in low for Jarrett Allen. I don't mind going to him. I think people are going to want to play Embiid and Jokic, and with Jarrett Allen's price tag creeping closer to those guys, I do think we'll see pretty low ownership on Jarrett Allen. I kind of like that from a GPP perspective. Let's go to the last game of the night, Charlotte and Portland. Certainly an interesting one here. I was very high on the Charlotte-Sacramento game last night. That worked out for the most part. A lot of big games, including P.J. Washington, who went absolutely nuts, over 60 fantasy points. We're going to see, Charlotte, I think, is in another good spot, but we don't know exactly who's going to be in there for them. Like, one of the reasons I was so high on that game was just the situation, right? They were missing Cody Zeller, missing Gordon Hayward, missing Devontae Graham. All 3 of those guys now questionable to play against Portland. So the matchup for Charlotte is once again very, very strong against Portland, who is a very poor defensive team, especially missing guys like Nurkic and McCollum. 232 total, so you certainly see that reflected from Vegas, and the Blazers favored by 6. So from the Charlotte side, it's really going to depend on who ends up playing, and we might not know that information till late in the slate. Again, this is the last game of the night. I believe it's the only one that starts at 9:30 Eastern time. Yeah, it does start an hour and a half after any other game on the slate. So you might have to do some guessing here. The good thing is I do think there are quite a few plays in this game, and you might be able to kind of, finagle your lineup around a little bit depending on who is in and out. For Charlotte, assuming Zeller and Hayward and Graham all miss, I'm going right back to PJ Washington for sure. I would anticipate him getting the minutes at the 5 whenever Enes Kanter is off the court, and perhaps sometimes even when Kanter is on the court. So Washington would be certainly a fine play. LaMelo Ball has been awesome. You think you can play him. So yeah, pay attention to that Charlotte news. Certainly affects a lot there. The Portland side is interesting to me because I think you look at some of the stats that Charlotte allows. Damian Lillard's just been fantastic, obviously, in this role without G.J. McCollum. Charlotte, though, I talk about this a lot and write about this a lot. They have just been stifling pick-and-roll ball handlers all year long, both in terms of the amount of possessions against them that they allow and in the efficiency when teams do use those. I think they're number one in the league in both categories, which is just crazy, allowing by far the lowest amount of total pick-and-roll points from the ball handler of any team in the league. That is Damian Lillard's bread and butter. He's been for years, the best or, top 2 or 3 pick-and-roll ball handler efficiency and usage rate player in the entire league. So that's a little bit concerning for him. What Charlotte does is they basically kind of, their defense kind of crowds the paint against pick-and-roll ball handlers, or they double team it. And so what happens is they allow a ton of spot-up shooting, a ton of threes around the arc. I could see them trying to force the ball out of Damian Lillard's hands a lot in this one and leaving open shooters around the perimeter. So guys like Robert Covington, to some extent, Gary Trent Jr., guys that can shoot the 3, Carmelo Anthony a little bit. They seem like they're overpriced a little bit, but like last night we saw a huge game from Buddy Hield from 3. Again, he's kind of has a similar role to some of these guys. So I'm interested. I think you'll get guys like Covington. He's 5,700 on DraftKings. Again, not getting there most of the time at that price point, but this is the spot for him. I mean, I think he's top 20 in the league in spot up opportunities. Most of his offense does come from shooting threes. This will be a pace up game where he can get involved defensively. So he's coming off some rough games, but if he's ever going to get, 40, 50 fantasy points, this would be the game. Kind of I would say probably only a GPP play there, but I am interested certainly in him along with Carmelo Anthony. And then I think Gary Trent Jr., again, he does seem a little bit overpriced at $6K, but you're going to get 35 minutes out of him. He shot double-digit 3-point attempts, which is what you want as a spot-up shooter against Charlotte in the last 5 games. So I don't know if I would play Gary Trent Jr. and Covington together, but I think one of those 2 guys, I'm going to try to maybe get in my lineup as a sneaky play. I think you'll get those guys low-owned and then maybe fade Damian Lillard, who I don't think this matchup sets up particularly well from him, especially from a scoring perspective. All right, a little quick rundown of Monday's 7-game slate. Of course, please give us a 5-star review on this podcast. Give us a review if you would. It really helps us bring you this podcast Monday through Friday free of charge. If you want, go over to runpeersports.com, sign up. I think you can get 20% off, something like that, if you use promo code Workbench21. Everything under the same umbrella over for us at Run Peer Sports. I think you'll like what you see if you're not a subscriber already. We'll be back probably earlier. This podcast will be released a little bit earlier on Tuesday. We'll get it recorded probably tonight, fixing the technical difficulties. But for now, thanks for tuning in as always. And until then, we'll check you next time.